All right, we're going to call this meeting of the Economic Standing Policy Committee back to order. I will start with our acknowledgement statement. The City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Region 3. Madam City Clerk, could we please do a roll call?
Yes, thank you. Councillor Campbell. He's absent today. Councillor Carlson.
Present.
Councillor Dodick.
Present.
Councillor Middleton Hope.
Present.
Councillor Palladino.
Present.
Councillor Parker.
Present.
Acting Mayor Croson.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Schmidt-Rempel.
Here.
Mayor Hagan. Mayor Hagan is absent today, so we have 7 of 9. Thank you.
Madam City Clerk, do we have any changes or additions to the agenda?
Yes, we do have a couple. With regards to 6.1, grants and incentives update, that's listed as a submission right now, but administration requests that it be a presentation. They have a video of the process, and the participants in the community are in the video to talk about the process.
All right. Does anyone on council have any objectives to moving that up to presentations 5.5? No objections to that? All right, we'll move that up to 5.5.
Also, there are 2 items of urgent business to be added to the agenda. They are for Section 7. They are confidential items. The first one, 7.6, Sponsorship Opportunity 1, and the next one, 7.7, Sponsorship Opportunity number 2. This is a request of administration. They came after the agenda was set by the Agenda Review Committee, so it will require 2/3 of the committee voting in the affirmative. Thank you.
So requesting to add these 2 proposed urgent business confidential items, we do need that 2/3. We're going to vote on these 2 together. Could I please have a motion that we add these confidential items? Councillor Carlson. And we'll call the vote on that. All in favor? Are there any opposed? Seeing none, that carries, and those 2 agenda items are added. So we're going to move on to the adoption of the agenda. Councillor Middleton Hope, be it resolved that the agenda of the Economic Standing Policy Committee on June 15th be adopted as amended. Councillor Middleton Hope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are there any additional additions or deletions? Okay, we're good. Then I call a question.
Calling the vote. All in favor? Is there any opposed? Seeing none. The echo's gone. Perfect. Thank you very much. Moving forward, presentations. Oh, consent agenda. Sorry. From Councillor Parker, consent agenda. Be it resolved that the minutes of the Economic Standing Policy Committee held on Wednesday, May 19th be approved, and the Mayor and City Clerk be authorized to sign the same. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. If there's no changes that need made, I would just call the question.
It's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, that's carried. All right, on to presentations. I was just getting excited about that. Presentation 5.1, Trevor Lewington, Chief Executive Officer, Economic Development Lethbridge, regarding Economic Development Lethbridge 2021 Year in Review. Mr. Lewington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and good afternoon to you and through you to the rest of the committee today. I'll keep this brief because I know you have a stacked agenda, but I did want to bring to your attention a number of key metrics and highlights from our year last year, 2021, which is also a requirement in our Memorandum of Understanding with the City, of course. You may have already received a printed version of the attachment today that was included with the presentation. If you'd like another hard copy or other hard copies, we're happy to share those with you for distribution to interested stakeholders. We'll go to the next slide if we could. And just want to remind you a little bit about our organization in terms of our mission. Our job is to be proactive, so that means we go and do things without necessarily being asked to. Our job is to anticipate the needs of how we grow Lethbridge as a community and figure out what those strategies and what those things need to look like. And then, of course, our primary role is to promote the city as an excellent place to live, learn, invest, visit, and do business. So that means talking to an external audience to the city itself and trying to bring that interest to our community. And so again, that's what we're all about, ultimately strengthening, diversifying, and growing the Lethbridge economy. If we can slide down to the next one. Just to let you know that we do, of course, prioritize what's important to our community. We get stakeholder engagement. As most of you are aware, we have a board of directors that includes 31 sector representatives meant to provide input on what's important to our community. But we do stay aligned with the province. So listed on the left-hand side of the slide is the key provincial focus sectors of the economy. And so we do our best to make sure that any of the regional initiatives we're working on, any of the organizations that we're a part of, any of the work that we're doing is directly aligned with what's important to the province, where it makes sense, or adapting that to the strengths and capabilities of Lethbridge itself. So again, just a reference to some of the programs that are there. And again, if there are questions down the road, I'm happy to explain some of those acronyms and some of the work that's being done on a regional basis. We'll slide down to the next one. This is really perhaps the most important slide in the deck from your perspective, I would imagine. And if you look at the recent history, last year, 2021, was the busiest year we've had on record for our organization. So we handled a total of 62 new investment inquiries. So that's external new investment to the city. There were 62 active files that were reviewed and supported last year. And then from a business retention and expansion perspective, we started splitting out those files separately in and around 2020. And you can see there that we handled 30 of those, slightly less than when we were during the peak of the pandemic, but combined a very significant amount of work was undertaken by the team, and I'm very fortunate to have a great team. You can see the job creation numbers there. You can see the number of inquiries. You can see the economic impacts. I'll just say two things. First and foremost, the numbers, the dollar numbers on that slide represent only direct economic impact. So that's the direct construction value, building value, the direct impacts to our economy. If you're familiar with the STEAM model that's used for sport events, or if you're familiar with some of the other economic models that are out there, they'll talk about things that are indirect or induced spend. Those are interesting, but they're tougher to measure and they're a bit fluffy. This is just the tangible number that's communicated to us by those investors. These are the things we can measure, we can touch, we can see. So the good news, I think, for your benefit is the numbers that you see on that page are the smallest, most conservative number possible based on actual things we can see and touch. So why does this matter to you? Well, at the end of the day, between new investment last year of $349 million attracted to the city and expansion impact of $11 million, for every $1 in municipal funding that we received, we created an economic impact of $475. So that 475 to 1 is, in air quotes, your return on investment. That's not a real financial math calculation. But effectively, when you think about you're making an investment in contracting us to provide that service, for every $1 you give us, last year we were able to return $475 to the economy and to the city. So we think that's pretty significant. We're very happy with that number. You can also see on the chart that it does fluctuate wildly from year to year. And that's just a function of how long some of these files take to process, when land purchases are actually complete. There are some lag times in terms of how those processes work. But 475 to 1 was your return on investment through our work last year. We'll slide down to the next one. So one of the other areas where we do work, of course, is supporting entrepreneurs. So in the last 10 years, the companies that have been directly supported by TechConnect have generated $32 million in terms of government grants, loans, and investor contributions. They've had pre-commercialization sales of $23 million, and those companies, again, this is just the companies that have been in TechConnect itself, more than $12 million worth of payroll, so that's money people get to spend in our economy buying things, has been generated out of that building. So, again, these are very small conservative numbers. We can only track companies prior to their acquisition if they're acquired by another party. So we did lose 4 of our biggest startups. They were acquired by other entities and then they disappear off our stats. We also have an MOU with anyone that comes through Tech Connect that they have to self-report their numbers to us, but we have no mechanism to enforce that once they leave our building, and so some people do drop off. So these are the actual numbers reported and compiled that are available to us, so it is, again, a minimum number that we can report. And if we just scroll down one line, since Tech Connect was created in 2011, jobs created out of that building is 292. So almost 300 jobs in the tech sector that we've been able to generate over the last 10 years. And of those, about 54% were actually post-secondary grads from our local institutions. So part of the impetus for this particular project, for those of you that were on council then, you may recall, was to create ways to retain more of our post-secondary grads in our community. And so that's one of the mechanisms that was done, and we've been successful in doing that. So we'll slide to the next one. We work through the Regional Innovation Network of Southern Alberta, or RINSA, which has a number of partners across our community that support entrepreneurs. We, of course, have Tech Connect, we have the Women in STEM program, and a number of others. At the end of the day, it's an ecosystem, so we are here to support entrepreneurs and find the right services, the right supports to make them successful. And the infographic comes from Alberta Innovates. This is the provincial sort of lens on how projects, how entrepreneurs start at ideation. They discover they have ideas, they're probably working in their basement, and as they work to commercialization of their product or service, hopefully they're successful, they can validate their markets, they can scale, and they can grow. So just as a reminder, we primarily focus on the front half of that innovation ecosystem, but as the province has been changing programming, we've been adopting new programming and trying to make sure we can serve clients all the way along that continuum and make sure that Lethbridge startups and Lethbridge entrepreneurs continue to be successful. And so to that end, if we go to the next slide, the Women in STEM program was specifically targeted with federal funding, so this is not municipally funded, this is entirely a federally funded program to support underrepresented groups, so Indigenous, female, and other newcomer Canadian entrepreneurs. And you can see over the last year, we offered 167 workshops with almost 1,500 attendees, and through our business mentors and our business advisors, conducted 630 advisory sessions in the last year. So very specific, tangible outcomes coming from that federally funded program to support entrepreneurs in Lethbridge. We'll go one more slide. We did win an award from Economic Developers of Alberta. So we always like to be recognized by our peers because these are the people in the trenches doing the same work as us, who hopefully have some recognition of what it requires. And so we worked again through federal funding to create a supply chain automation pilot program. That was a program that we had 14 local businesses participate. It was 8 weeks of coaching sessions. And the idea was that local businesses, particularly anybody in manufacturing or warehousing, would be able to take those 8 weeks of classes and graduate with an action plan to actually implement automation in their business. And so the value of that program as a pilot was recognized by an award from Economic Developers of Alberta. So we're quite pleased with that recognition last year as well. And then finally, one of the things we are tasked with, of course, is to go and leverage the funding that you provide to us, and that's not leveraging in terms of debt, that's really should be multiplying. So our last business plan, you may recall, had a target of 55 cents for every $1 of municipal funding. It was our job to go and find 55 cents for every one of those municipal dollars. That's the orange line on the graph. And you can see there that last year we actually had a record of $1.89 in additional funding on top of every $1 of municipal funding. So we are doing quite well in terms of attracting other funding to our organization. And I'll just say thank you, because it is leveraged in the sense that we can't go after a lot of those funds without a matching municipal contribution. So the funding you provide us as a part of our core block is the enabler to go after some of these grants, most of which require us to be able to contribute to the program. So your core funding allows us to go after these other opportunities and expand our reach. So again, thank you for your trust in us and the long history, and hopefully again you can see that there is a return on your investment in terms of doing more with other dollars. And so with that, I'll just invite any questions that you might have about any of those key metrics or either of the two attachments that were provided with today's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Lewington. I see I have Councillor Carlson up in the queue here.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Lewington, for coming down and providing all the information and the year in review that you sent in. Just a question on, if I can just go back to that last slide, and I closed it on mine for some reason. But I really appreciate the maximizing municipal funding, but the the biggest increase has been in the last 3 years during COVID. So I'm wondering, is a lot of those dollars COVID related, or are we hoping that graph will keep going up, or do we see it come back down to historic levels?
Is this the part where I say, don't hold me to that trajectory in the trend line?
That's
I will say that we have received very few COVID-related dollars. Most of the COVID programming from a provincial and federal perspective went directly to businesses, went directly to individuals, as it should. The vast majority of that funding is related to the Women in STEM program. So that was a 3-year contract, as well as RINSA. So our organization is the fiscal agent for the Regional Innovation Network. And so money flows through us to other organizations. And so as both of those programs came online and increased, that is the bulk of that change.
okay, thank you.
Great question.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions for Mr. Lewington? Councillor Palladino?
Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I'm looking at that graphic that shows the paper airplanes, and I'm looking at maybe 20% chance if I have an innovative idea that I get through that ditch. Is that about right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's well known that most startups fail, and so part of the reason for that ecosystem is to support and try and increase the number of people that are actually able to successfully commercialize, for sure.
Any other questions at all? All right, seeing none, I have a motion here from Acting Mayor Crowson. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee receive the report and present as information. Presentation as information. Acting Mayor Crowson?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, of course. Thank you, Mr. Lewington, for the presentation. And the motion I have here is to be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee receive the report and presentation as information. And I'll call the question.
Question's been called. All in favor? Are there any opposed? Seeing none, that's been carried. And we have item 5.2, Mr. Lewington, Chief Executive Officer, Economic Development, Lethbridge, regarding growing creative industries. Mr. Lewington.
Surprise, it's me again. So thank you again for the opportunity to share this with you. Where this came from, well, first of all, we'll get to the agenda slide. I'll just, if we slide to the next one, let you know that I'll talk a little bit about where this came from, talk about why it matters, the size of the prize, talk about what could be the potential municipal role for you to think about, how my organization and others might be able to support that. I'm joined today by Aaron Crane from Tourism Lethbridge as well. And just talk about sort of the range of options. So if we can scroll to the next one. This actually was initiated by the Deputy Mayor. So Deputy Mayor Schmidt-Rempel was attending an event at TechConnect, and it was being facilitated by the city's third-party consultants supporting visioning workshop around economic development. And the question was really around, okay, how are film and television inquiries handled today? Where do those flow? Are there opportunities to capitalize more on this opportunity? Can we be more proactive? And so I will say thanks, Deputy Mayor, for the question. It prompted a lot of thinking on our part. And as some of you are probably aware, the university gets inquiries for film and TV production. The municipality gets inquiries for film and television production. My organization, Tourism Lethbridge, we got a lot of these things fly in. We've had a number of successes throughout Lethbridge's history. But there is an opportunity, I think, to be more coordinated, to be more proactive so that we can maximize the opportunity. And so I want to share with you today essentially just some thoughts on what we're contemplating. And the reason it's here for you today is, of course, we're working on our next 4-year business plan, which will be a corresponding 4-year budget ask. And so I'll be back here in the first week of November to delight you with budget requests and sort of all kinds of dazzling spreadsheets around our desires there. And so we'd love to get some feedback from you, from the committee, and it could be directly today, it could be by an email or through your representatives. Of course, when you're acting as council, council has 3 representatives on our board to be that funnel. But we'd love some feedback on where you see the organization playing a role here. Is this important? Do you agree that it's worth pursuing? And that will help inform our business plan. So it's really, there's no ask today other than we'd love to hear feedback and your thoughts as we move forward. So if we can slide to the next one. Last year, again, this is according to Invest Alberta, there were about $500 million worth of film and television production in the province. So it is pretty significant. The government's numbers are that it created just over 9,000 jobs in the province. And part of the reason Alberta has become an attractive jurisdiction is this Alberta Film and Television Tax Credit. So productions can earn up to about 30% back, which is very competitive when you look at other Canadian jurisdictions. Alberta is relatively easy to get to, especially out of Los Angeles. We have direct air connections via Calgary. We have the I-15, which becomes Highway 4. So trucks of equipment and things can get here relatively quickly, relatively easily. Alberta, of course, has world-class locations when you think about the Rockies, the prairies, physical spaces, but also our natural beauty. We have lots of technical talent across the province that's been proven. And the picture that's actually on the slide is the Calgary Film Centre. If you've never had a chance to tour that facility, it is specifically designed for sound stages, post-production, to support the film and television industry. So Alberta, and you've probably seen all of the media, has become a destination for film and television in the last couple of years. It is a growing segment of the population. There is an opportunity to go after that. So if we go to the next page, North Bay, Ontario, if you've ever been there, has a population roughly half the size of Lethbridge. They conveniently market themselves also as the gateway to opportunity, which I think is interesting. But they reported last year that they had 17 productions. And so the local economic impact was about $31 million across 207 film days. Now, this is not to denigrate the other gateway to opportunity. It's certainly not to beat up on North Bay. But we have just as many attractive natural spaces around us. We have just as many interesting places in southern Alberta that if North Bay, Ontario can deliver this kind of impact in a year, again, I think it's something that we should be exploring further. So if we go to the next page, again, I talked about this in my previous presentation. You know, there are direct impacts to think about, there are indirect impacts to think about, and induced impacts to think about. And you've probably heard these terms before. They come up in STEAM models. We talk about them in terms of economic impact. But if you think about direct impacts, that's when a local makeup artist has new income, right? So if there's a production in Lethbridge, that makeup artist that's hired by that production, they actually now have income that they can go and spend. What they spend it on, that's the direct impact of that production coming to town. And it should be noted there are a number of award-winning makeup artists in Lethbridge that have basically been living in Calgary for the last year working on the HBO production. So we have some tangible examples of that. Indirect impacts, when you think about those, that's the supplier of makeup and brushes to that local makeup artist because they're spend on those supplies. That's an indirect impact, but it's directly associated with that makeup artist being hired. And then, of course, when that makeup artist goes out for dinner, now that restaurant also has additional revenues they didn't have before, and so that's the induced impact. So as you hear those terms in different economic impact studies, that's sort of a rough equation of how they work. But if you go to the next page, there's also infrastructure impacts. So Mike Workington at Exhibition Park has been meeting with Invest Alberta. Exhibition Park will very soon have a building that includes high ceilings, high rigging capacities, that has dark days that require programming. That is an example of a location that could directly benefit from improved film and television content production in our community. There is actually a technical term for tourism generated by movies. It's called FIT, or film-induced tourism. So Fort Macleod is a perfect example who saw a surge of interested visitors post the Ghostbusters movie. So there is a tangible benefit that can be measured in terms of when your community or buildings or people from your community are featured in productions, that has spin-off effects. And then, of course, when those crews come to Lethbridge, they need to be housed, they need to eat, they hopefully will be attracted to some of our venues and will spend their money as well. So there's that personal spending. If we go to the next slide. Thank you. There's also this idea of workforce development. So the example that I was not aware of, but an individual from the NMAX team pointed it out. One of our challenges with hosting live events, like let's say a large Cirque du Soleil production in Lethbridge, sometimes can be things like riggers, people that have certifications and training to actually support that industry. So if we have more film and TV, if we have more employment in the area where rigging is required, that spin-off benefit is that skill set, those people can also support live events and other entertainment. So by growing the industry, it also supports other peripheral workforce impacts. And so there's some intangible benefit when that happens. So rigging was sort of the example that comes to mind. But again, I think that's an important consideration. So if we go to the next one. You know, the province has confirmed that over the next 3 years, they are committing another $225 million to that film and tax credit. And so that's $70 million a year that's available to productions. And so the province has reaffirmed their commitment. Now, depending any post-election weirdness next year, of course, things can change, but that is the 3-year commitment today to industry. And given the success of the program, I can't imagine any provincial government, regardless of political stripe, walking that back at this point. But we know we've got a bit of a runway for at least the next 3 years of provincial support, which again is driving that interest. And so if we go to the next one. So from a municipal perspective, something I'd like you to think about is having a clear policy in place for film shoots, the use of public realm, parks, roads, facilities, permits, all of those kinds of things. And so included with the submission today were 2 examples from the town of High River and the town of Fort Macleod of a municipal policy that in one document clearly and concisely lays those kinds of considerations out. And so I think there's an opportunity to do more of that and help coordinate the idea. And again, for council, when you're sitting as council, to kind of formulate what the priorities are, if it is a priority, in terms of how we provide that support and service to potential productions. I do believe there's value in one administrative point of contact for film. So just as Opportunity Lethbridge is a concierge for development and industry and real estate, is there an opportunity for a, quote, concierge or a key point of contact related to film somewhere in the administrative system? Having those policies, having that information readily available on the website. And again, there's some examples in the documents that I provided to you. And then when you're meeting with MLAs and ministers, you know, advocating for the industry, advocating for those incentives so that those continue to be supportive. But the key bullet is really the first one. One of the things I'd encourage you to think about as a potential area of work is this idea of a clear, concise municipal policy governing film and TV production in the city. So the second, if we go to the next slide, the second consideration then, which is external to the municipality, is how do we make it easy for these productions to land? How do we capture attention? How do we again provide that red tape reduction, one-stop shop sort of service? And so Calgary Economic Development actually has a film commissioner as well as a support team. And in this submission that was attached to this presentation is Calgary's location manager checklist. So it actually provides links to how to get insurance, how to book certain hotels, what are some of the industry groups that support. And so I do think there's an opportunity to produce such a monster that could be available to make it, again, very simple, very turnkey to industry. If you look at the provincial database, so there is a provincial database of potential locations to shoot in Alberta. Property owners can list their property on that database. There can be public spaces. There are very few in Lethbridge on that database. So it would be, it would be easy for someone to have a position. I could have an intern or something go and collect that information and make sure that we're well represented in that database, as an example. And there could be a whole strategy around this. There are communities smaller than us doing a significant amount of work, but the example of the Calgary checklist, I think, captures in essence what we would be trying to create. And so if we can go to the next slide, please. So it's really this continuum, right? There's a number of things we could do, and certainly in our next 4-year business plan, there are a number of things I could come back to you and present as solutions. And on the left-hand side, the cheapest, least complex is just to have a policy, right? That would be a great start, in my opinion. We could then, allocate resources to develop this film-friendly checklist. I could work with some of the other organizations in town, including tourism, including Exhibition Park, including some of the other potential venues, to build out this, simple checklist and resources, create a landing page on our website. We could put a working group together in terms of, local businesses, local industry that could be supported. We could develop a targeted investment attraction strategy, all the way to actually allocating a headcount, contract, full-time, part-time. This idea of a film commissioner, similar to the function that Calgary Economic Development has, around actually doing business development work, going and targeting these production companies, going and visiting producers, going and being on set, and actually bringing that business to Lethbridge. And of course, as you move up the arrow, there's more complexity and there's more cost, but somewhere on that continuum is where we can play, depending on this committee and where council's head might be at. So if we go to the next slide, please. So my recommendation today to you, again, for you to think about is, first of all, whether you think a policy is desired, and if so, what that could look like and what that should be. To be clear, though, that is incremental new work for your city manager and team. So I don't want to sugarcoat the fact that you are asking someone to do new and incremental work. There's a cost to that. So, to be fair, I want to call that out. Through your board representatives to EDL, we'd love to get your feedback on whether increased film, TV, digital content is something we should be including in our next 4-year budget cycle. And then, thinking about that continuum, thinking about that arrow, where on the curve do you think we should be playing? What's the scope of what we should bring back to you? And so that's really our recommendations to you to ponder today and to bring back to us over the summer as we continue to build out that work plan. And so that's really all I have for you. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewington. I certainly appreciate this presentation. As Mr. Lewington stated at the beginning, this was a question that I posed to the EDL team when I was participating in one of the Honeycomb research conversations. A couple of the participants, namely the County of Lethbridge and University of Lethbridge, indicated that they had been getting queries for film, but who do they send them to? What do they do with them? So that was when I put this question to Mr. Lewington and his team, and he connected with Opportunity Lethbridge, and that is what does bring him before us today. So I just wanted Council to have the rest of that background on this. Councillor Carlson, I have you up in the queue first.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you again, Mr. Lewington, for this information. You did indicate that having municipal policies, these would be city-owned policies, would be beneficial. So if I can, Deputy Mayor, through you to City Manager designate, how much staff time would it take to develop or borrow other communities' policies and adapt them to our own? Do you have an idea on that at this point?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, I don't have an idea off the top of my head. Happy to, look at other municipalities' policies. What I would propose is similar to a lot of the other initiatives, report back in the fall and possibly put this or the framework into the budget process for consideration as far as the path forward.
Thank you for that. And further to that point, maybe to Mr. Lewington, we do have occasional film crews in and around Lethbridge, likely through happenstance. And I think when I read through all the policies, procedures that you gave from other communities are playing in this to different levels of chasing or just hoping they show up. How much of an investment, you probably haven't done the work on this, you're thinking about a budget request perhaps, how much investment do you see this taking, and what's the length of time to see some return? Like, I know it's not like you just get a position and tomorrow they start showing up. It might be a couple of years down the line. Have you done any of that legwork?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for that. Speaking to the timeline, if I look at a standard investment attraction file that we deal with today for, a new agri-food manufacturing plant, those average typically 18 to 24 months from kicking the dirt initial inquiry to actually a land transaction. So to your point, you're not likely to see results inside of one calendar year. These are multi-year strategies, and we are sort of coming at it from behind other communities that are much more proactive. So there is some catch up to do there. Again, I think it's the value and the benefit of a 4-year budget cycle and a 4-year business plan is that there's a stage, there's a ramp up, there's some research, and we can build that out across the 4 years. In terms of investment, it's really infinite. Calgary went and built a $45 million facility. I'm not suggesting the city of Lethbridge do that, to be clear. You could, but that already exists. Why don't we just use it? Again, they have a team of 3 people that are directly assigned to business development, but then they're supported by the rest of their organization. They, for example, invest heavily in attending like the Cannes Film Festival. And so, again, that boots on the ground, direct connection. So it's a spectrum, right? It's certainly something that could be experimented with as a pilot, with a half-time or part-time, some sort of contract role. It's, again, the difference sometimes to a full-time salary is not that great. Is that worth the risk? And again, I think about North Bay generating tens of millions of dollars. Even after a year, if we've landed one production, that trade-off should be pretty straightforward. But it's a bit of one of those, just trust me, because there's no tangible number, and the province doesn't have great data in terms of, because although the province has a film commission and a film office, most of the direct connections are at the municipal level, so there's not a great resource in terms of how long do those inquiries take, who's spending what, and of course, people are hesitant sometimes to share their trade secrets around this is what it cost us to land that production and those kinds of things. So that's a very inelegant answer to your question, and I apologize.
And no, thank you for that. And just, if I can, Deputy Mayor, just to explore further, Calgary has ramped up quite heavily in this. Are other communities of our size, like, I don't know what North Bay does, if they just, for
Yeah.
luck, are in the right spot and people just show up, or if they are actively marketing, searching, are there other communities that we could look to that are actually of like size to ours?
Yeah, I think that would be an important part of the research of, perhaps the first year of this is to really understand the market and really get a better, appreciation for who's doing what. I mean, around us, the town of Fort Macleod for sure has been very successful. They've had a number of productions over the last 5 years. A lot of that has been driven by their CAO, former CAO, who has since left the organization, but had a very personal interest, had some connections in the industry, and really drove that herself. Others have invested in, sort of contract, for lack of a better word, site locators. There are companies in the industry that you could contract to, just as we do for site selection of potential firms. And so there's a broad range of things, and I guess that's why I'm here today, is just to get a sense of, does the committee feel this is valuable, waste of time? Is this something we should, come back? Because I don't want to come back with a proposal for X dollars if you're thinking it's X divided by 10, right?
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Do we have any other questions from members of council? No? All right, seeing none. I have a resolution here from Councillor Palladino. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee refer this item, including the ask of Economic Development Lethbridge noted below, to administration to review and investigate and report to a future meeting of the Economic Standing Policy Committee by December 31st, 2022. And then we have the notes below that were included on the presentation. Councillor Palladino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hearing you say that again, I wonder if we shouldn't make a slight amendment to that resolution to include the Economic Development Board reps as well as administration, and then work together and come back to council with respect to the recommendation on those 3 bullet points there.
So amending the motion, report to including the ask of Economic Development Lethbridge noted below to administration and Economic Development Lethbridge to review and investigate.
Concerned about the city staff time and that that'll be involved, but I think that was made clear that we're concerned about that. So
that we want to work together on that.
What level we're going to support this or not.
Do I have any questions about that amendment? Yeah, Councillor Carlson. Okay.
It might tie in. Deputy Mayor, I guess I'm curious. The second bullet, and sorry, I don't have this new in front of me, so I'm trying to read the very tiny screen. The second, now it disappeared. The second bullet talks about providing direction on where the strategies, and I believe that has to come earlier than December 31st. If Mr. Lewington and his team are going to actually provide some budget requests around this, it'd be nice to know sooner rather than later, so they can provide those before our budget deliberations this fall. So I'm wondering how we accomplish that.
Mr. City Manager, would you be able to respond to that?
Yep, so that's exactly what I was just talking to staff about, just trying to figure out how to navigate our way through this. Happy to take the lead in his administration and work through with Mr. Lewington and the rest of the board and Ms. Crane as to how we move forward. So I think the first piece of that might be reporting back in the fall, just to say here's our planned path forward.
And thank you for that, because I'm wondering if perhaps at this time, if members of economic or at a future meeting of council might just want to express some thoughts or interest, or I don't know, we can give direction, but I'd be interested to see some proposals. As Mr. Lewington said, is it X or is it X divided by 10? I don't even know what X is. So I would personally be interested to see what kind of dollars EDL thinks would be an adequate investment to chase some of these projects, because we know they do happen in communities around us. I'd be more interested to see them happen here. It's my opinion that at the moment, I'd be really keen to see some budget requests around this. I hate to think that inquiries are coming into our community to the university or city staff or the chamber and just sort of not going anywhere. So I don't know if that makes sense to Mr. Lewington, but I'd love to see some proposals coming forward to chase these into our community, but that's just me.
So do we maybe want to move that December 21st, 2022 date up, or December 31st, 2022 date up to the September SPC?
Yes, I think that makes sense. We may not have all the answers at that time, but we can come back with some more information at that time.
So what was the date of that September? September 28th at SPC? Okay. And we'll make sure that you get that package couriered to you, Councillor Dodick. You're in for debate? Okay. So then we have an amended motion here. Have we got it up on the screen? Okay. So for the amended motion, be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee refer this item, including the ask of Economic Development Lethbridge, noted below, so those points, to Administration and Economic Development to review and investigate and report to a future meeting of the Economic Standing Policy Committee by September 28th, 2022. Councillor Palladino? That's okay.
I just leave it at that. That's fine.
Okay. And so we'll open for debate. Councillor Parker.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to thank Mr. Lewington for bringing this forward. And thank you, Deputy Mayor, for kind of getting the conversation going. And I think when you watch, you hear all the buzz regarding The Lost of Us, the Ghostbusters, all those things happening in our community, and you always kind of wonder why not Lethbridge an area. And so I think we need to be on the radar, and I think we need to be proactive versus them coming to us. We have to show that we want to be a player. Yellowstone might want to film a scene here or a season here, if you've ever heard of Yellowstone. But quite honestly, if you don't ask and you don't show that you're in the game, nothing. I don't know what this is going to look like in the end, but I think we want to, like as you said, we want to be playing the game. I think we should be playing the game. I don't know what the scope of that looks like, but at least this is a good start, so I will be supporting this.
Councillor Carlson?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Further to that, I go on record by saying I would really appreciate to see strategies coming from EDL to see increased film and TV production in our community. The second question that was asked, I don't know where on the spectrum I'd like to be right now. I'm hopeful that if EDL goes forward and crafts some ideas, they will come back to us for budget consideration, and we'll sort of know by the investment asks and the return on investment possibilities of where we'd like to play. So I hope that gives enough direction to move forward at this meeting, but I appreciate it coming forward and support it.
Thank you very much. I will also be supporting this. I guess it was my idea, so I probably should. I know that just from other economic development meetings as well, we know that Nikki Yuko has a policy in place. They have had film crews in over the past 3 years. So we do know that there is filming coming to our city, and it's happening. If we're losing stuff, we don't know that yet because we haven't investigated that. We just know that there are queries and people confused as to where to send the queries to. This gives us a chance, like Councillor Parker said, to be proactive. Getting this together would show a desire to work within this space. And, it's an asset list, and moving forward on these sorts of things is of imports to producers determining where they want to film. So at least getting some of this underway and started does demonstrate that we're interested in doing this. I'll turn that back over to you, Councillor Palladino, for closing.
There are
are no further concerns or questions, I would move that we move for the vote.
Vote's been called. All in favor? Are there any opposed? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Lewington.
Hopefully they can generate the 475 for one.
Yeah, even 200, half of that.
All right, moving on to item 5.3. Mr. Matthews, City Treasurer, read 2026 Capital Improvement Program CIP project recommendation. Mr. Matthews.
So just as Jennifer sets up, our Jennifer Jarrett, our controller and for corporate finance, will be going through the presentation here.
Hi, thank you, members of Economic SBC, for having me here today to give an update and recommendations for the Capital Improvement Program budget. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this CIP update is to bring forward the 2026 year of existing capital projects within the 2022 to 2031 Capital Improvement Program for approval in order to align the CIP with the operating budget in the same year. The CIP is currently approved for the first 4 years, 2022 to 2025, and we are asking Council approval of the 5th year of the CIP, or 2026. At this point in time, we are not requesting any new approvals or changing any existing approvals. This is simply just the first step to align the CIP with the operating budget in the same year. Next slide, please. So Council has had an opportunity to see this slide before. This shows the approval window of the 2022 to 2025 CIP to be extended to include the 2026 year in order to align the CIP and the operating budget in the same year for the 2027 to 30 CIP and operating budget. As you can see, the teal boxes also indicate where there will be opportunities for Council to review these budgets on an annual basis. So this is a full Council resolution that was passed on August 24th, 2021 to provide direction to streamline the operating and the capital budgets in the same year and to provide an opportunity for annual reviews. This approved enhanced budget process allows Council to fully implement an aligned capital and operating budget with deliberations in the same year by 2026. So in the next few slides, I will be going through each section of the CIP, or I guess if you have a binder, it would be the tabs within the binder. This is the list of Section C, or transportation projects, in the existing CIP. And as you can see, the 2022 to 25 amounts have previously been approved, and the 2026 expenses are shown in gold. And that is what we're recommending bringing forward to Council for approval. As you can see, a majority of these programs are to maintain safety or preserve existing infrastructure, such as transportation improvements and upgrades to intersections and roadways. The projects starting with page C are funded from the Basic Municipal Transportation Grant, the Pay-As-You-Go program, or Federal Gas Tax Fund. The 2 CO projects at the bottom are off-site levy projects to provide access for growth in the community. These are funded through, the off-site levy projects are funded through borrowings, and repayments are made through the off-site levy. These are the capital projects in the existing CIP with 2026 expenses, again highlighted in gold, for environmental utilities. These projects are funded through borrowings from the utilities or capital from the utilities in waste and recycling, water, and the wastewater utility. Any borrowing bylaws that are required will be brought forward next month in July to City Council. Approval of these 2026 expenditures are not going to create any additional pressure on utility rates based on information we know today. Next slide. So these are the capital projects within the existing CIP for Section F, or electric utility. These projects are in the CIP in order to meet regulatory requirements as set out in acts, regulations, and codes within the province of Alberta, and to meet electrical demands that are placed on the electrical system as a result of new development in the community. These electric utility projects are mostly funded through the Electric Reserve. So Section D, community projects. These are the projects that are that most of the time is spent on during CIP budget deliberations. What we've done here is we've split Section D into two different slides. This slide shows the ongoing projects within Section D with an identified source of funding. The majority of these projects on this page are to maintain current assets or are ongoing programs. Before I get into the other Section D, community projects, I just want to talk about the local government fiscal framework first. In the CIP, we currently show LGFF funding for future projects as undetermined funding. LGFF is scheduled to replace the MSI and BMTG program, or provincial funding, in 2024. Alberta Municipalities has indicated that the LGFF will be 37% less than the annual average of the past 10 years of funding for MSI and BMTG we have been receiving. However, the province is still working with Alberta municipalities to determine a funding allocation model for this. Currently, the funding pot for LGFF will be allocated to Calgary and Edmonton first, and the remaining amount will be allocated to the rest of the municipalities, including the City of Lethbridge, based on a funding allocation formula that is still being determined by the province. Instead of requesting Council to approve the 2026 projects with an undetermined funding source, at this point, we're recommending that these projects be pushed out to 2027 for now. This slide shows the capital projects that have expenses occurring in 2026 and have not been allocated funding from a specific funding source. When there is more certainty in the LGFF program in the future, these projects could be brought forward at that time with an available funding update, and these projects could be brought back into the 5-year approval window of 2022 to 2026. So the recommendation for this 2022 to 2031 CIP today is that the Economic SBC recommends that Council approves the existing 2026 CIP projects in transportation, environmental utilities, and the electrical utility, or Section C, E, and F of the current CIP. Also for Council to approve the existing ongoing 2026 CIP projects within Section D, or the community section. To reallocate other 2026 CIP projects in Section D with undetermined funding and push those out to 2027, and to direct administration to make the appropriate amendments to the 2022 to 2031 CIP document on the website. And when LGFF allocation has been determined by the province, then we will bring an available CIP funding update to Economic SBC to consider proposed CIP projects at that time. So I do want to mention that we are always actively looking for grant funding opportunities for any capital projects for the city. When grant opportunities do arise, these will be brought forward to Council in a timely manner, and a CIP amendment can be made at that time. Similar to when the ISIP and MSP funded projects were brought forward last year. I'd also like to remind Economic SBC that the annual operating and capital budget reviews will be opportunities for new initiatives or projects to be brought forward or considered. Before I ask if there are any questions, I should just mention that there are 3 other attachments included as part of this package. There's this presentation. There's the CIP summary pages for each section of the CIP from the existing CIP that I just went through. The 2026 expenses on those pages are highlighted in gold, and any of the 4 projects that we're recommending to push out for now are shown as well. The other 2 attachments that we have are the 2018 to 2027 CIP summary with actuals as of April 30th of 2022, and the 2022 to 2031 CIP summary with actuals as of April 30th, 2022, for any projects that are in progress right now, as an update for council. That's all I have. Are there any questions?
Very much, Ms. Jarrett. I see I have Councillor Parker in the queue.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I know there's a lot of work put into this, and thanks for the update. So obviously, these are projects that were approved by the past council, and so a lot of these projects may be new for the new members of council. And I'm glad to hear that we're constantly looking for grants to hopefully bring these numbers down, and quite often, touch wood, there are times when we're successful. My question to the city manager is, there's a term I've been hearing lately, inflation. And a lot of these projects were approved in 2021. What do we have for, obviously, what are you expecting? Is this going to change our outlook in a lot of these projects in regards to the cost of goods, and as you can see on the news and on a daily basis?
Madam Chair, I will direct that question to Mr. Matthews to speak to the inflation.
Through the chair to Councillor Parker. At this stage here, when we've gone through and we've taken a look at the projects, we did reach back out to all of the project managers. We don't see necessarily at this time, if you're referring to like inflationary cost overages at this stage. However, I think the biggest thing I think would be fair to say is that we haven't, for many of these projects, we haven't gone to tender. So once we go to tender, that will be probably more likely. We'll start getting to see whether, how our estimations are and so forth.
So you always want to plan for worst case. Do we have reserves in place or somewhere allocated within the city operations to tackle those costs if they do come out?
So this would be where the funding comes from, the existing remaining funding in the CIP. If council remembers, at the end of the CIP, there was some funding left over. There was also some funding set aside for the grants and so forth. Those same funding, that funding pot is the funding pots that we would look to for those areas, i.e. the amount of money that we're having the grants and and reserves that we could allocate into cost overages.
And my last one, I appreciate the answer, but that $10 million you speak of, that's kind of earmarked for when grants come over the wall for matching grants, but we could use it outside of that scope. Am I correct?
Council would have to make a decision. Right now, council has allocated that towards matching grants. What they haven't allocated so far is there was a remaining balance at the time of last May, around $5 million. That has grown a bit. And of course, if it's utility side, then we would also have to take a look at, whether or not we can fit it in within the utilities as well. Things like accumulated surplus or other areas we would look upon.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Dodick?
Yes, thank you. My question is to the city treasurer. I heard the soon-to-be renamed, or now renamed, MSI is going to be the LGFF Framework Fund. I heard the number 37% less being indicated as the reduction in provincial monies to the city. Now, I appreciate COVID. You had indicated at some point that we had some front loading on grants from the province, but going back pre-COVID and adjusting for inflation, in terms of actual dollars and cents, do you have an idea as to what a 37% reduction in provincial grants will have on the actual dollars that we might have available to fund CIP projects?
Through the chair to Councillor Dodick, there's 2 components here. So the MSI and BMTG components, so just giving some context there, that was reduced in 22 and 23 from 21, and that was to do with the COVID piece. So we got front-end loaded in 21. So just to give some context here, in 2021, the Lethbridge's component was just over $25 million. For 22, it's to $10.2 million for both years. We're estimating the local government fiscal framework. So what they've said from the provincial budget is 37% less funding per year compared to the annual average for 2012 to 2021. Based on our estimates, it could be around 13.2 million. But one thing I would like to say there is that they are also looking at a different funding model of how they allocate this criteria. So that is being worked still through the province, and we won't know that information till January, most likely of January of 2023.
Assuming for the moment that they go forward with a 37% reduction in the framework discussions that you just mentioned, or different funding models do not come into play, is it fair to say that a 37% reduction is really going to handcuff us in terms of capital projects that we will be able to fund, having regard to prior MSI funding versus what potentially may be anticipated?
To the chair, to Councillor Dodic, so it is definitely a reduction in funding. I think it's fair to say that we've planned for at least 2022 and 23, but in future years, overall, we would have had much larger grant amounts to draw upon from the province.
Fair to say that the message is that we may not be building as many community projects as we had in the past? You don't have to answer that. That seems to be the obvious. Thank you.
Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Matthews, for the presentation and information. If I can just go to slide 10, please. The section D, 2026 projects with undetermined funding. And the recommendation is to reallocate those into 2027. Makes sense on some of them. The fire station number 3, I think it was D22, yep, D22. Right now we've got 5 million allocated in this current CIP, and then moving the 10 million in with the other 15 million into future CIP deliberations, discussion. Does it make sense to spend the 4.9? What is the 4.9 for? Is it just for design? And is design that far ahead of a project, throwing money away? Or does it make sense to allocate the entire 30 million into the 2027 to 31, rather than keeping 5 in this bucket and then moving the other 25 forward? Does that make sense?
Chair, to Councillor Carlson. So yes, if I remember right on this, the 5 million was portion of design and land components. So that it is a not. I think it would be fair to say, and I'm not sure if Ms. Nightingale's online here, but when you're looking at projects and so forth on it, typically you try to have your design work fairly close to the time you're actually building for it. So not to say that we couldn't do this work, but I think that I defer to. I'm not quite sure if she's online or not, but if somebody from facilities there would be able to comment further on that.
And thank you. If somebody can weigh in, just because in my experience, yeah, if you design something 2 years ahead of putting it in the ground or putting it out for tender, the design is basically thrown away dollars. So I'd rather.
Yeah, if nobody from facilities is here, I'm fairly comfortable in this world. So, yeah, weighing in, within a year, the initial design and a Class D estimate, 30% contingency, and as you move forward, working through to refine the design and the final estimate with the specs that are ready for tender. Yeah, you don't want that much further out than a year before you're ready to go to that.
So thank you for that. So I can't remember what the portions were. I'm going to assume it's nearly a 50-50 split between design and land, possibly. Does it make sense to keep the 5, Mr. Brierley, in your opinion, in 22 to 25, or reallocate and push the entire amount into the 2027-31 CIP?
Yeah, it can be reallocated probably at least closer to the end of, say 2026. So it would still be within the same time frame, but.
Thank you, because if I recall, and I'm trying to recall, I believe it was going to be spent in 2022 or 23.
I have a good memory, Councillor Carlson. It was 2023 for most of that work. And so what would happen, what could happen here is we just push that along, so we don't start that work as early as what it suggests. It's still within the approved window of components, so just that we would delay.
Can we ensure that when we do CIP amendment sheets, that is shown? Thank you.
So if I could weigh in on this, of course, with anything, as I'm sure council is very aware, when you push something out, there are other impacts. Once you get outside of the certain zones, as the city continues to build, there are other impacts that the residential construction in those areas, there are other costs associated with that. So.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brierley. We do have Ms. Nightingale online to answer the question that you had, Councillor Carlson.
I hope she remembers, because I don't.
She just got on, so you could repeat.
Yeah, we'll need you to repeat that.
Thank you, Carrie, or Ms. Nightingale. The question I had was with D22, Fire Station number 3. We have nearly $5 million allocated in the current CIP. In front of us is to reallocate the bulk of that, the rest of the dollars into 27 to 31. I'm just wondering if it makes sense to spend the $5 million earlier rather than later, or would it make more sense to reallocate the entire 30.6, I believe it was, into the 2027-31 timeframe? Mr. Matthews and Mr. Brierley answered part of that, but I'm wondering your thoughts on that, if you can.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Carlson. I was able to catch the responses from administration, and I'm in agreement with what they have indicated. I think that there is some work to be done on the Fire Station number 3 that can proceed within this cycle, but any design development would be best pushed towards the end of the cycle to align with approval of a fire hall. But there are some functional study requirements and service levels and site selection activities that can proceed within this current cycle.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from any other members of council on this item? All right, seeing none, I have a motion from Councillor Middleton Hope. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee recommends City Council, 1, approve the existing 2026 capital projects within the 2022-2031 Capital Improvement Program CIP as follows. A, 2026 CIP projects in transportation, environmental utilities, and electric utility, sections C, E, and F. B, existing ongoing 2026 CIP projects in community, section D. C, reallocate other 2026 CIP projects in section D with undetermined funding to 2027. And 2, direct administration to make the appropriate amendments to the 2022-2031 CIP document. And 3, direct administration to bring a CIP funding update to Economic SPC when the Local Government Fiscal Framework LGFF allocation is determined by the Government of Alberta. Councillor Middleton Hope.
Will I invite any discussion, questions, comments, concerns? Going once, going twice.
Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just appreciate the work that's been done on this with the recommendations, so that I know that prior council wanted to sort of harmonize the operating budgets with our capital budgets. I think the presentation shows that this is a step towards that. I think it's an appropriate move for our council and our community, so I will be in full support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Councillor Carlson. I too will support this, given that it does move us in the direction of harmonizing those two budget processes. From someone who watched those budget processes over the years, I saw the frustration that other members of council experienced in that lack of harmonization. So certainly thank you for the work on this, and I look forward to going through this process and seeing it move forward. Back to you, Councillor Middleton Hope.
Seeing no further questions, Madam Chair.
Vote's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you very much. Moving on to item 5.4, Tyler Kassor. I think I'm pronouncing. Procurement Manager, Group Purchasing Organizations Benefit Overview. He's on Teams? Okay. Mr. Kassor.
Thank you to the Economic SPC members for allowing the opportunity today to take a look into a little bit of the benefit overviews associated with GPO utilization within the city of Lethbridge. If we could go to the next slide, please. So GPOs are essentially a membership that allows us to leverage our spend. So more traditionally, we would think of smaller consortiums that were more popular potentially throughout the 80s and 90s. And more recently, we see things similar to these GPOs that effectively allow a large number of members to come together to scale. And so for a small or medium enterprise or a city sized similar to us, it really provides significant benefit. They're not something that's really new, but what they are is, of course, a trade compliant tool in which all parties are welcome to bid. We actually post the intent to utilize these contracts on an annual basis through bids and tenders. And again, all entities are ultimately able to go to the relevant sites and bid into this type of work. If we could go to the next slide, please. So when we think of who's traditionally involved, we have us as the owner in many cases, or the buyer, and then we have the supply base that we generally deal with. What a GPO does is essentially bring in a third party who really manages the needs of a large collective of individuals, and it provides the opportunity to serve as an agent to the members. So in a lot of cases, if we were dealing with a company similar to Microsoft, for example, we may not have the ability to leverage things as well as we would have if we had the GPO on our side to help lead some of those discussions. And so we don't only see benefits specifically related to cost avoidance, but also on their ability to allow or on our ability to allow them to advocate on our behalf. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So there's a variety of benefits that are associated with GPOs in general. And so cost savings, of course, is one that people often think too, like what is that avoidance going to look like? But favorable contract terms and, of course, service level are something that are equally as critical. We could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So, of course, we want to make sure we're able to save money without sacrificing service levels. Really, what we're able to do here is obtain that bulk pricing. Again, if we think back to consortium purchasing back in the day, without us actually needing to do all of the work. So it's just a tool that we can use when appropriate to allow us to enter into an agreement relatively quickly in a trade compliant manner. And so just some information, when I put this together, which was probably about 10 days ago or so, the estimated savings were about $368,000. And I just received some updates yesterday that would have put us over $400,000 year to date. And interestingly, there are some longer term opportunities that exist that see benefits in excess of $200,000 coming down the line as well. One of the notable examples that we had was, of course, the utilization at the airport to get a sweeper. So they can allow us to skip the line in some senses, in that we don't need to go through a full-scale competitive process. We're actually able to just pull the trigger and procure the right type of equipment for us at the right time. We could go to the next slide, please. Great, thank you. So favorable contract terms. Really, the role of the GPO is to maximize the benefit for the groups. Traditionally, we would think of it again as cost savings, and we still, of course, do look for that, but we really want to make sure that we have terms that are agreeable to us. So that could be payment terms, multi-year agreements, things along those lines. In some instances, we see more favorable payable terms where we may have 2% 10 payable terms, which allow us to realize additional discounts, things along those lines. And it also allows for negotiation and customization. So in a traditional maybe contract A, contract B type situation, we don't always have that ability. But since we have these deals already struck, we can essentially deal with some of these proponents similar to the way that we would enter into any commercial negotiation. So it allows for a little bit more of a free-flowing chat and really allows us the opportunity to get an understanding as to whether or not this is going to provide benefit to us on the long term. Next slide, please. Thank you. So they empower the groups, of course, to get superior service. And again, one of the ways that I think of that is, when we get into a dispute or if we have a dispute, a proponent may view things differently if it's just the city of Lethbridge, but then when they realize that it's the city of Lethbridge who's a member, it's also the city of Toronto and the city of Edmonton who's recently come online into these types of agreements, it becomes in their best interest to make sure that they're able to keep not only us happy, but of course the GPO itself, who's ultimately managing these contracts. And so in regards to high level of service, they also negotiate contracts on behalf of us and looking to mitigate risk. And next slide, please. Thank you. So we've been formal members of Public Sector Procurement Canada, which is the federal agreement, the province of Alberta, Canoe Procurement, which is Sourcewell and Kinetic since 2019. So we formally post and utilize these contracts. And just some additional information. So we actually have above average local spending with approximately 32% staying within the city and about 40% within the province, which is really good. And the GPOs, as mentioned, are allowing for some innovative proposals that we'll hopefully be able to provide some more information on in the near future that could have, again, in excess of $200,000 benefit on a specific contract, which is great. And on that note, I would just like to say thank you for your time and see if there's any questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Do we have any questions from any members of council? Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And I'm sorry, is it Mr. Katzor? Am I close?
It's really close. Katzor.
Katzor, thank you. Thank you for the information and presentation. Can you talk a little bit more about how these GPOs are trade compliant? I'm just thinking, since you mentioned the Greater Toronto is part of this, and we may have different agreements here in Alberta than they do in Ontario. I'm just wondering, I guess it's the GPO that manages all those differences, but how do they remain trade compliant?
Yeah, it's a great question. So really it has to do in the way that they actually go to market. So they make sure that they take in all of the relevant legislation, and the main one in particular is going to be CFTA, or the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. Now we do see a number of agreements that exist similar to the New West Partnership, things along those lines. They typically have slightly lower thresholds, but at the national level, we look to satisfy things kind of federally. And as long as they go to market with those considerations in mind, they're able to put forward a compliant tender. And I guess a little bit further than that, some of the additional things that they'll do is look to provide aggregate discounts across commodity groups. And so that's how they're able to ultimately provide these types of contracts nationally.
Thank you for that. Next question, if I can, Deputy Mayor, through you to City Manager. This is just for Council's information, or is this something Council would need to approve, or is this more of an administrative thing? You're just keeping us in the loop of here's some things we're trying to do to find some efficiencies and some cost savings. I just don't see this being a governance piece.
So I'm glad you asked the point, because this is perfect. It was my direction to bring this here. In fact, how we got this here, Mr. Katzor hasn't touched on it. I actually brought this into Canada, in the largest municipality in Canada, and it's a leading practice in municipal government. It happened about almost 10 years ago now. And yeah, it was something I really wanted to accelerate here, but I wanted to ensure that council was fully aware and informed and had the opportunity to ask any questions, any concerns. This is, it's really an opportunity to drive savings and efficiency. So you can buy the same thing for a better price, for instance. So some of the GPOs that we work with here, for instance, that were mentioned, one of them has over 50,000 member agencies based out of the U.S. Some of those agencies could be a 3-person municipality, could also be the city of Chicago, city of New York. So a lot of opportunity to leverage some great expertise and work more efficiently and effectively. And whether it's buying the same thing for a better price, buying something better that produces a lower total cost of ownership, or saving staff time and effort in terms of developing specifications, issuing and awarding and evaluating tenders and contracts. There's huge opportunities for savings and efficiencies, and I wanted to make sure that this was very transparent for council.
Hey, thank you, Mr. City Manager. So you're moving forward with this. This is to keep council in the loop, unless council says, no, back off.
That's exactly correct, and I would be happy to speak to any questions or concerns, as well as Tyler.
Thank you for that. Final question, if I can, Deputy Mayor. Is this exclusive to municipalities, or are there other community organizations that we should be reaching out to? I'm just thinking our post-secondaries, some of our larger not-for-profits, et cetera, that could maybe benefit from being part of a GPO, or is this exclusive to municipalities?
No, it's definitely not exclusive to municipalities. So other, levels of government, nonprofits, post-secondary, and so forth, they're able to access this as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions with regards to this item? Seeing none, I have a motion from Councillor Dodick. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee receive the report and presentation as information. Councillor Dodick.
Yes, thank you very much. It's self-explanatory. Thanks for the report, and I would call the question.
Vote's been called. All in favor? Anybody opposed? All right, seeing none, that is carried. Moving on to presentation 5.5, Andrew Malcolm, Urban Revitalization Manager, regarding grants and incentives update. Mr. Malcolm.
Madam Chair, just because I can't access my computer at the moment for some reason, is there a presentation that goes along with this, or is it? Nope, just Andrew and Mr. Malcolm is, oh, excellent. Hope there's a puppet show.
Can we request it?
Report in the submission. Oh, there we go. There's a report in the submission that we were originally going to just have as a submission, but over the course of time, our team at Opportunity Lethbridge has been very busy in preparing a video to share with the community as to the success of the grant incentives programs, and so we really wanted to take the opportunity to show that to Economic SPC today. I do apologize, it's 9 minutes in length. We tried desperately to get it down to 5 minutes, but there's some really good content in there from our business and community members that we'd like to share. I'd also mention that I'm joined with Hunter Hagee here today, who is a recipient on a number of the grants that we have through the Oliver Building Restoration Project, and he would be available to speak to council on his experience utilizing grants and ultimately restoring a very challenging project in our downtown. So with that, I will press play and sit down and leave it to you. Don't press play.
When you're opening up a store, it seems like a very daunting process. There's signage, there's renovations, there's countertops and registers and all these things that go in part with opening up your first store. This was a very old building. I mean, it's almost 100 years old now. And so we needed to hire contractors to change out the plumbing, add in electrical, change some of the electrical, and just update the building altogether to make it fresh and new. We wanted to build not just a store, but a store with atmosphere and character because we wanted to draw and attract people to the downtown area. There's a lot of cities that have downtown areas that are not utilized, that aren't bustling, that don't have these really great local stores. And Lethbridge is so unique where we have really worked hard to revitalize the downtown. And now it's become a hub of life within the city again. And the grant only helped us achieve that because we were able to achieve the vision that we had.
We'd heard about the city grants through actually our realtor initially, and then the companies that we talked to for kind of the building retrofit and renovations were also aware of some of these. But after our realtor had mentioned it, that there are some city grants and considerations given for reusing buildings in the city, that's really where we started to look at the city website and noticed that this particular property was well qualified to meet a number of grant opportunities for our city. We'd been looking for some time for property to do a new build in the city, but property prices have gone up. New build construction prices through the pandemic have gone up as materials costs have gone up. So this was actually a really nice fit for us, and the grants really allowed us to have a great help as we look at servicing the debt moving forward and dealing with the cost of construction for us. I think this is a very productive thing to have. When you look at a business like ours where we've got a necessary service that's here, we're happy to be in Third Avenue. I think there have been positive changes, as I mentioned before, with the neighborhood kind of revitalizing here. So I think the grant had a lot to do with us even being able to complete our renovation here, and choosing this as a site knowing that we would have those grant dollars available certainly pulled us to this specific location rather than building off in one of the newer kind of more peripheral locations. Certainly we have a lot of gratitude for City Council for providing this program, and I think it's a very valuable program to have.
Building had been available for quite a while, and we looked at it and we loved the location. We loved the floors and just the room in general, the big windows and that. From a business owner's perspective, it really opens some doors, and there's so much potential in this city, I think, and sometimes you just need that extra push and that extra incentive to pull the trigger on something. The grants made it very realistic possibility to do it and to pull it off, because it was a pretty big venture going into it. The probability of this working out in a positive sense for us increases. It makes that decision a little bit easier. And from a city's perspective, these kind of moves are very important. I think using these spaces that otherwise are just sitting there and just taking up space. But if you can provide people with that incentive to do these things like we've done, I think that's a win for the city and win for the business owner.
We originally were looking at this property, and one of the more appealing factors towards buying it and purchasing and moving our business here was the grant money. Knowing that we had some help in the humongous renovation that we had to undergo, it made it worth it. The grant process was actually very seamless and very straightforward. Andrew did a fantastic job meeting with me and my contractor on a regular basis throughout the construction process, just to kind of keep us updated on what we needed for invoicing, what we needed to show on our grant process and approvals. Honestly, it was a very seamless process.
When you buy an old building in downtown or anywhere in the city, really, it's not as profitable or even actually profitable at all if you fix that building up and rent it out. It's cheaper to buy a piece of land on the edge of the city and throw up a brand new building, and that makes more economic sense. The other thing people might not realize is this building here is over 100 years old. when it was built, there wasn't even any building codes. And so a lot of things had to be upgraded to the new codes. That costs money, and it takes time and money. And we got a lot of buildings inside town that need to be rejuvenated. I'm grateful for them. I'm grateful for the city. I'm grateful for council for what the foresight that they had in seeing that these programs are an investment in the future, that once they pay off, they just keep paying off. It's win-win-win.
Well, speaking directly to council, I was on the BRZ, I was the chair of the BRZ, and I was the BRZ representative on the heart of our city for a number of years, and I sat through many meetings where the threshold of these grants were so high that nobody was applying. And through reassessing these grants and opening up the barriers, it allowed, from what I've heard, many businesses to apply and receive the grant funding on it. So it shows that these programs are usable and are necessary for our community. Funds and programs like this really do help business owners reinvest into their business, and with the parameters and with the criteria of what the city has set up for it, it allows us all to kind of work together on maintaining our properties.
Originally, I had plans to build a patio when I did the restaurant, and there was quite a bit of construction happening at the hotel at the time. And it took a while before I could get approval, and eventually I kind of decided I wouldn't actually build a patio, and decided that perhaps that wasn't an investment I was prepared to make at this time. So that all changed kind of when I saw the grant funding that was available from the city for improvements to the downtown and to businesses. So once I looked into it a little bit more, I realized what an incredible opportunity it was. So I changed my mind, and I designed a new patio, one that made a little bit more sense, a little bit smaller, and the granting was incredible. It's always difficult when you build a new business and you invest a lot of money. You're never really sure what that return on investment's going to look like. And so seeing the grant and the availability of the grant allowed me to kind of reimagine what I could do out here and how I could make a affordable investment that was also being supplemented by this grant, and it just was a home run. The patio just has added another layer of opportunity for guests to come in and enjoy Italian table outdoors. So wonderful street appeal. I think it's really helped the property, and it's really improved downtown. I think revitalizing and continuing to focus on how we improve our downtown core, it's imperative. And I think that there's been many initiatives over the years, and I think you just got to keep trying to work and test these initiatives to see which ones really stick and which ones really make a big difference. And my personal experience, again, I can't express how big of a deal it was and what a great opportunity it was for us to be able to look at the revitalization and the efforts that are going into it from our city and say, way to go, well done.
So a project of this magnitude obviously has a large budget and a large timeline. When reviewing grants and support from the City of Lethbridge, we could focus on certain extras, certain enhancements, or channel attention to certain key areas that the city is trying to highlight and promote, and we definitely took those into consideration for this project. I think the City of Lethbridge has been very intelligent in ensuring that grants are attracting or targeting the types of improvements that they want to see in the downtown. And I think that's something, if they want to continue to see that advancement and those improvements, targeting dollars towards those key initiatives is helpful for all business owners. Thank you. Yeah, thank you to the team at Opportunity Lethbridge. We appreciate their partnership, their collaboration, and their interest in making sure that our projects succeed. Together, we make a better Lethbridge.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Malcolm. Do we have any members of the public that had wanted to speak to this? If you want to come forward and state your name, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. My name is Hunter Hagee. Good afternoon. Thanks for listening to me for a moment. I am the owner of the Oliver Building, and in that video there, it takes a little bit away from what I wanted to talk about because that was just really well done and well said. I own the Oliver Building, and we, it's one of the success stories of these programs, really. We've used 3 of those programs. 7 or 8 years ago, the Oliver Building, demolition of it seemed imminent, and today the Oliver is a thriving building. It was going to become a parking lot. Today there's many businesses there. I'm going to name them quickly for you. House Sweet Candy Store, Empower Pole Fitness Studio, Mocha Local Home Delivery, Home Meal Delivery, Thelma and Thistle Clothing Store for Badass Women, Splitsville Law Office, Lethbridge Therapy Center, Heartspace Yoga and Solstice Juice Bar, Gen X Marketing, Balana Beauty, Beauty Blend Bar Beauty, The Sugar Spot, Skin Art by Krista, Blonde Label Hair Salon, The Nail Boutique, Tiger Bee Clothing, and Colbanks Creative. All of those businesses are in that one building. And if that's not impressive enough, there are 3 apartments in there with 4 tenants. So if you're counting, and I know we are, that is 16 businesses, 46 jobs created, and 3 apartments with 4 residents. In restoring the Oliver Building, we accomplished together something that is nothing short of overcoming the impossible. I'd like to acknowledge a few people who helped us get there, including the city itself. Top of the list, my wife, Carol. She stood by me through tough times there. Canadian Western Bank, Kevin Willoughby and Darren Wennis, they stepped up for funding and funded the project. Silver Ridge Construction was our general contractor. Jordan Shimoda, Chad Billiard, Rich and Chad Thiessen. And all the sub-trades that we used, there's almost countless sub-trades. They were all local. We used everything local if possible. In my opinion, in the last few years, the city administration and its employees have become far more focused on customer service than they have been in the past, and even seem eager to find solutions and to remove some roadblocks. There's a few city staff that I believe went above and beyond, and I just wanted to mention them by name. Kevin Doe, Darren Harsh, Brian Connect, Joanne Bazin, they all were really helpful to me. I don't want to forget our potential future city manager, Andrew Malcolm. He was also great. To a true pro, he represents our city really well. A nod to Ted Stilson, George Cool. A special thank you to our former city clerk, Jean Johnstone. She once told council that she would chain herself to that building before she would let it be knocked down. What an exceptional lady. I know there's probably other people that I'm forgetting, but my apologies to them. The biggest thank you, I think, goes to City Council, because honestly, to have the vision to come up with and implement programs that help developers to revitalize these outdated properties is really important. Without those incentives, the Oliver Building, I don't think it would be here today. To complete the Oliver, we used several of the incentive programs that you approved, including the TRIP program, the Urban Property Improvement Grant, and the Housing Incentive. Alone, these are all great programs, but the biggest impact came when council allowed developers to stack them. That's when the Oliver went from impossible to possible to completion. One reason the incentives are necessary is, as that handsome guy in the middle of the video said, it's easier to take a chunk of land and build a new building on it. It's very hard to take a 100-plus-year-old building and bring it up to code and restore it. That's not easy to do, and when you look at the numbers, it doesn't always make sense. I realize there are people who oppose these incentives. Usually they need to be given all the information. When I talk to naysayers and inform them by explaining how the programs work and the payback in the long term that the city gets to a person, they see it as a win-win situation and support the incentives. It's pretty simple, really. An Oliver Building with 16 businesses, 3 apartments, and 46 employed citizens pays a lot more taxes in the long run than a parking lot pays. When the Oliver was built 120 years ago, it was placed right in the heart of the city. It's still in the heart, and 120 years from now, it will that's not going to change at all. I think we have to ask ourselves the question, what kind of city do we want going forward? What kind of heart do we want? I support fully these programs, and I hope that you will continue to support them as well. Together, we have built a lot of momentum in revitalizing our city, and let's keep it moving. Let's keep it going. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Heggie. Do any members of council have any questions for either of the presenters? Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you to Mr. Malcolm, if I can. Part of the request, I think back in November, was to, I believe, sort of get an update and see the progress on these, because council did do a lot of work to implement these incentive programs. But I think part of it was also to see how they could be expanded. Yeah, there we go. Councillor Parker's resolution. How they could be expanded and improved upon and offered in other areas of our community, perhaps. Is that forthcoming?
In the content of the report in the submission, that is addressed. It goes through and highlights some of the financial success of these programs to date. And it also has a section around opportunities for future grants. Within the conclusion in particular, it talks about how administration would discourage us from just simply expanding our existing programs to cover all commercial development in the community, because that is basically a bit of a scary thought, a race to the bottom, if you will. Whereas we think that if we focus specifically on strategic areas of city council within our municipal development plan, there are future and more opportunities for grants and incentives to be effective. And we do note a few of those areas being agri-food, doctor and healthcare, as well as brownfield. And there are probably numerous more. Something that we will be looking at as administration is to bring forward new recommendations within the operating budget. And part of what the report also alludes to, that basically the money being approved to date has been spent. So our existing programs will largely be put on hold at this time, and we'll be bringing forward opportunities for council to potentially give us additional funding, again, with plans to be brought forward in the operating budget.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Acting Mayor Crowson.
Don't go anywhere, Mr. Malcolm. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I realize, Mr. Malcolm, your incentives are primarily commercial and business, but not a week passes lately that I don't have a not-for-profit either talking to me or somebody mentioned to me how they're looking for space, how, you know, the rent is unbelievable. So there's just as much concern right now about not-for-profits not having space. Do we have any incentives either within your portfolio or within the city to help not-for-profits find space?
So we do have some programs that are administered through our CSD and our Rec and Culture Department, including the Community Capital Grant, the Fee Assistance Program, Community Event Support Grant, to name a few, and the Affordable and Social Housing Grant. Those are all programs that are not under the purview of Opportunity Lethbridge, and so I can't provide any specific comment. I am aware of them, and I don't believe any of those specifically address the need for space or things like rent or rent payments. So I think that could be a gap in terms of what Opportunity Lethbridge oversees. That would be outside of scope at this point in time.
Thank you, Mr. Malcolm. If only we had a historic building we could convert into not-for-profit space, something council will have to look at, but that's not a question, that's just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Crowson. Before I ask any questions, do we have any other members of council that would like to ask any questions? All right, seeing none. Mr. Malcolm, I do have a couple questions for you. The video was great. Thank you very much for doing that. It really highlighted, because one of the questions I was going to ask is, you know, what responses and what lived experiences do we have from the grant recipients? Do we also, though, have collected information from those grant recipients about what we can do to make things even easier for them to apply for those grants, work through it? It was good to see or hear from Mr. Heggie that we have some good focus on customer service. That's great to hear. But what else can we be doing for these grant applicants to make this a bit easier?
Yeah, so it relates to the grants process itself. We've been in a continuous process of improvement, and I think we've come a long way since Opportunity Lethbridge itself has been staffed and resourced accordingly. And so we have made huge strides in this area in the last little while. So I think the grant processes themselves are fairly accessible and easy for business owners to access. If there was a space for improvement, it would be getting the word out about them being available. Now, of course, that's contingent on having funding available, which is very tight right now. But this video in particular was part of an effort to try to get the word out and to make it more known in the community that these grants are available. In terms of what else we could do, in the report there is a section about where there's other grant opportunities. And through our experience, it's not just about providing money out the door. There are things about our existing processes, specifically when it comes to setting up a business or a development, that we can be better positioned as a municipality as to helping them out. And those would be through process improvements, which are, again, not necessarily funding out the door, but in terms of resources or reallocation of resources to focus on those processes and better those processes. And we hear about that just by sitting down and working with these folks as they work through their projects. And that really comes down to a new approach or a different approach led by council through our executive team and down to administration.
And so I would expect that you would be working on those processes then, or bringing them back to us as you've heard them?
Yeah, we do intend on bringing forward an update to council or SPC, I believe, in September around a red tape initiative around public engagement, and that would be kind of our starting point to thinking about breaking down and understanding more about which processes we can directly influence to be more effective with our development and building community.
Thank you very much for that. I noticed in going through the report, we have no applications to date for the Industrial Municipal Tax Program. Have we examined why that is? What can we do better with that? Is it just something that shouldn't exist and be reallocated to somewhere else?
So I wouldn't suggest that it should not exist and be reallocated. It is one of our newest programs, so it was approved in October of 2020. And I think it's just the nature of industrial growth happens far slower. Now, when that does happen, it's typically larger scale. And so I think it's just a matter of time before that one does get accessed. Again, that's a tax incentive policy, so when we do get an application, we will have to bring it forward to council for an individual approval because of its impact on the taxes across the community. So I think we will be looking at that one shortly. It's just, again, it's a matter of time.
And then recommendations to the value of that then would come back to us as well.
That's right.
Okay, and I asked that because I understand the value of it, so was kind of surprised that we hadn't seen anything on that. So hopefully we do see something on that in the not too distant future. Does anybody else have any questions at all for Mr. Malcolm? All right, seeing none, I have a motion here from Councillor Carlson. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee receive the report as information. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just want to extend my thanks to Mr. Malcolm and all of his team and colleagues, especially for the video, and especially like to thank Mr. Hagee for speaking today. It is always, well, I really appreciate it when we get some kudos for our administration and the excellent work that we know they do. And speaking a bit selfishly, it's kind of nice to hear a thank you to some of the work council does. We don't often hear the thank yous, we hear the complaints beforehand. And I would like to extend or return the thank you. I remember a tour that many of us on council, previous council, went on when the Oliver building was in progress. And it was many of the discussions that day with yourself and other local business owners, property owners, and entrepreneurs in our community that sort of set the seeds and the germination process for these programs to unfurl. So it's with great appreciation that I hear the progress that we've made on these, the impact that they've had, and it sets the stage for council as we head into our upcoming operating budget to consider further programs of this nature. So just like to extend my thanks. Unless there's anything further, Deputy Mayor?
Vote's been called. All in favor? Are there any opposed? Seeing none, thank you very much for that presentation. Moving on to submissions. Submission 6.1 is a submission from Abby Slovak, General Manager, Opportunity Lethbridge, regarding Opportunity Lethbridge 2021 annual report that was in our agenda package. Does anybody have any questions for Ms. Slovak? Councillor Carlson?
A quick question through you to Ms. Slovak, if you can. Is there anything you'd like to highlight to council or the community out of this? Rather than us just reading it for information, it's sitting on the website. Is there anything you'd like council and the community to take note of?
Yes, thank you so much. I think looking across our department, we're newly formed Opportunity Lethbridge. We wrote our business plan and came together in 2021, and we're a formation of Lethbridge Land, real estate and land development, urban revitalization, and the airport. And in forming Opportunity Lethbridge and bringing this team together, we've been able to do a ton of amazing work. Things have been very steady with the land development. We've had great success in crossings, and we are seeing lots moving in Riverstone and as well in Sharing Industrial Park. We've had great success, as you just saw, with our grants and incentive program and with urban revitalization efforts. And we've also done a ton of great work out at Lethbridge Airport, which you've all been able to participate in over the last little while. So I would just offer a great kudos to our team for all that they've been able to accomplish, and looking forward to what we can bring forward and make happen in 2022 and beyond.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Are there any other questions or comments on this at all? All right, seeing none, I have a motion from Councillor Parker. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee accept for information the Opportunity Lethbridge 2021 annual report as provided in Attachment 1, and further be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee recommend that City Council approves the Lethbridge Land 2022-2025 work plan as provided in Attachment 2. Councillor Parker.
I just want to say thanks, Ms. Slovak, once again, and your team, and I'm hopefully that council will support this when it is recommended, so I'd call the question.
Question's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? I see none. That's carried. Thank you very much. We will now take a brief 5-minute intermission. Refreshments are available upstairs. You can take a long 5 minutes, and we will return into a closed session. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll do the motion to go into the closed session first before we break. Could I have that motion? Councillor Carlson. All in favor? Yep. And that's passed. Thank you very much. All right, so are we ready to go? Okay. So, moving out of our closed session, I have a motion here from Councillor Carlson, 7.1. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee directs that the closed meeting discussions, report, documents, and attachments with respect to the development opportunity remain confidential pursuant to Section 24, Advice from Officials of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Further, be it resolved that Economic Standing Policy Committee direct administration to proceed with the confidential recommendation presented in today's closed session and report to the July 26th, 2022 meeting of Council. Councillor Carlson.
Call for the vote.
Vote's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, that passes. This one, I have a motion here from Acting Mayor Crowson. With regards to the Lethbridge and District Exhibition update, be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee direct the closed meeting discussions, reports, documents, and attachments with respect to the Lethbridge and District Exhibition update remain confidential pursuant to Section 16, harmful to business interests of a third party, 21, harmful to intergovernmental relationships, 23, local public body confidences, 24, advice from officials, and 25, harmful to economic and other interests of a public body of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. And further be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee requests Mr. Workington, Lethbridge and District Exhibition, to present an update and answer any questions at the June 24th, 2022 Advocacy Advisory Committee meeting closed session. Acting Mayor Crowson. Question's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, that carries. I have a motion here from Councillor Parker with regards to an assessment complaint. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee recommend that Council direct that closed meeting discussions, reports, documents, and attachments with respect to the assessment complaint verbal remain confidential pursuant to Section 24, Advice from Officials of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Councillor Parker.
Call the question.
Question's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, that carries. I have a motion here from Councillor Palladino with regards to the 2023-2026 operating budget process update number 1 verbal. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee directs the closed meeting discussions with respect to the 2023 operating budget process number 1 verbal remain confident pursuant to Section 21, harmful to intergovernmental relations, Section 23, local public body confidences, 24, advice from officials, and 25, harmful to economic and other interests of a public body of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Further be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee direct administration to provide closed orientations for committee on the new budget process, including budget pressures and initiatives 2022-2026 operating budget update on July 19th, 21st, and 26th, if needed, from 8:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. Councillor Palladino.
Call the question.
Question's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, that carries. I have a motion from Councillor Carlson with regards to the 2023-2026 operating budget process update number 2. Okay. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee directs that the closed meeting discussions with respect to the 2023 and 2026 operating budget process update number 2 verbal remain confidential pursuant to Section 16, harmful to business interests of a third party, 21, harmful to intergovernmental relations, 24, advice from officials, and 25, harmful to economic and other interests of a public body of the Freedom of Information and Protection Act. Councillor Carlson. Vote's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? That passes. Thank you very much. I have a motion from Councillor Dodick with regards to sponsorship opportunity number 1. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee directs that the closed meeting discussions with respect to the sponsorship opportunity number 1 remain confidential pursuant to Section 23, local public body confidences, and 24, advice from officials of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. And further be it resolved that Economic Standing Policy Committee recommend that the City Council direct administration to proceed with the confidential recommendation presented in today's closed session, and that this item be forwarded as an item of urgent business to the June 24th, 2022 meeting of Council. Councillor Dodick.
Like the previous resolutions, this is a FOIP resolution. I would ask for council support. call the question.
Question's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none. I do see that Councillor Carlson has popped in the queue here. Councillor Carlson?
Deputy Mayor, on the last item and the one that's coming up on 7.7, as economic, if we forward something as an urgent business item, does that immediately get put on the upcoming agenda for council, or does it require a 2/3 vote or a majority vote? How does that work? Or does it immediately just go onto the agenda?
It's part of this resolution, and it requires majority vote.
At the council meeting?
Here. And it will be added to the June 21st council meeting.
Will just happen, it doesn't have to go to council as a vote there?
It does have to go to council as a vote. Economic doesn't have the authority to make that decision here.
Thank you.
Okay, I just, and we're sure that it's going to the closed meeting of council. Okay, thanks.
And I have a motion from Councillor Carlson, sponsorship opportunity number 2. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee directs that the closed meeting discussions with respect to the sponsorship opportunity number 2 remain confidential pursuant to Section 23, Local Public Body Confidences, and 24, Advice from Officials of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. And further be it resolved that Economic Standing Policy Committee recommend that City Council direct administration to proceed with the confidential recommendation presented in today's closed session, and that this item be forwarded as an item of urgent business to the June 21st, 2022 meeting of council. Councillor Carlson?
Call for the vote.
Vote's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, that passes. Thank you very much, everyone. That is our meeting. Have a good evening.